I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and here today with me is Eric Sprott, CEO of Sprott Mining. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, Charlotte, good to be here.
Good to be here in your office. Thank you so much for having us. We're here to talk about the Save Canadian Mining Initiative, which launched this week. The aim is to address predatory short-selling practices which are harmful to junior miners and have become an issue since the tick test was removed by IROC in 2012. For those who may not be familiar with the situation, can you start by describing why the Uptick Rule was the right thing to have in the first place?
Sure. I've done lots of short selling in my life because I recognize there's anomalies in the market. For example, the NASDAQ peak in 2000, the great financial crisis in 2008. But I've always worked under the premise of the Uptick Rule, and that means you can only short when a stock's trading up or flat. And I've always understood as an investor why it was important, because it's so easy for predators to create chaos in a stock, and all of a sudden people are looking at it and they're just selling because it's going down. And when there's no Uptick Rule, people can just keep selling down at will. Now, having evolved more into the junior mining space recently, which I'm in, I get to witness these things, and I don't have 100% proof that odd things are happening, but I can guarantee you, when you see a stock going down 15% in a matter of minutes, that is not someone who's selling who's trying to get the best price. That's someone who's selling who's trying to create the worst price. And so Terry Lynch has begun this Save Mining campaign. I relate to it very, very quickly. I would prefer to see the Uptick Rule reinstated. I might even go so far as to say, as an investor in junior mines, I've actually probably gained by the Uptick Rule being gone because people are undervaluing the stocks. But by the same token, I want the retail investor to have a fair shot at things. And between the predatory short sellers, the front runners, the algos, it's becoming a game that's very, very difficult for the average investor to win. And we got to get the average investor back in the game.
Right, so you've mentioned some of the consequences we've seen since 2012. Can you talk a little bit more of what's happened from then until now?
Sure. Well, a couple of things that the group that set up this campaign have determined is that the venture exchange, when compared to indices that would mirror base metals, gold stocks, since 2012, it's underperformed those indices by something like 245%. We've also seen the number of financings is plunging. It's down something like 80-odd% from its peak in 2012. So I think those data points, prove the case. I think anyone who watches these small cap stocks can see it. You can see it in the market. You can see some shorter coming along right at the end of the day at 359.59 and knocking the stock down a little, just for the sake of starting at a lower level. And let's face it, short sellers, when it's their 100% of their business, are very predatory. They want stocks to go down. They will put out false information. They'll create situations in the market where technically the stock's breaking through some downtrend, but they've created it. And then everyone looks at these things and it's easy to create panic and chaos. And so that's why the Uptick Rule, in my mind, should be reinstated.
Okay, so we know you're a very active participant in the junior resource space, especially recently this year. Can you describe how you see the market right now and why it's the right time to be going forward with this initiative?
Sure. Well, it's not as though, for example, here we are in November of 2019, that it's any better time than another time. I've always been a believer when the Uptick Rule ceased to exist, that it was a mistake, because it just lets traders come in and overwhelm the market when they choose to do that. I sense now that when I see what happens to certain stocks on news releases, where anytime a stock was up, 25% in a day, all of a sudden in come the short sellers. Because they kind of know that with volatility, they can cause things to go back down quickly. So between that, the very odd trading that happens, the lack of new issues, the valuations of the companies. I mean, there's so many companies that have no market cap here because they've just been ground down. So I think it's very opportune. It never should have been taken away, in my mind, on all markets. But it's particularly vulnerable in the venture exchange when the market caps of the companies are way less individually than the money of the guy who's shorting it. I mean, you can have a market cap of 20 million. The guy's got $1 billion worth of shorting he can do. Well, how are you going to stand up against that? So there's more of a vulnerability there, and we've seen, I think, more chaos and devastation of the mining industries happen on the venture exchange and the bigger exchanges.
So what would be the ideal outcome? You've mentioned it being more fair for retail shareholders, but how would you expect to see the junior resource environment change in this ideal situation?
Sure. Well, of course, the fact that if you could reinstate the Uptick Rule, you're not going to have these constant smackdowns that we have, because now the guy has to wait for it to go up to put the short on, okay, which I think is much fairer. As I say, it's the environment I lived in. It was fine. So I just think that there'll be less abuse of the system. It's bad enough, and I'm very critical of all exchanges, by the way, that, they have the front running, which we all know about. They have the algo trading. Now we have the shorters can just sell a stock at will to whatever they want to sell it to, knowing full well what kind of thinking will go on when something goes down sharply. So the whole thing has to stop. I wish they'd get rid of front running too, for that matter, but the Uptick Rule, I think, is probably the weakest part of the demise that happens to companies on the venture exchange. That's the weakest part, because you can just kill value, and the shorters are so much bigger, more organized than the company is. The company's out there trying to drill. The short seller's just trying to get his stock down. 365,
I think it's worth noting we're in a challenging market right now. Would we see an improvement in this situation if it improves, and would you expect to see an improvement in the near future?
Well, that's a great question. I responded to Toronto Stock Exchange polls before, because I used to run a brokerage firm, and my belief is the market acts better when people are in a fair market and can make money. People, you're not going to go back to a place where you lose all the time. So the exchanges have to think about what they've allowed to happen here. We've noted that the activity keeps going down all the time. Well, why wouldn't it keep going down? They'll cease to exist here somehow. Other exchanges will come along. Maybe even, as you know, there are other exchanges that are trying to supersede the TMX by preventing front running, as an example. So you know that in the passage of time, if something's inappropriate, change will happen, and somebody will lose their business, somebody else will take their business. So, if there was an exchange that banished the Uptick Rule, maybe, the TMX might find themselves losing business, in which case they'd probably right the ship properly.
Okay. So what are the next steps? What are the steps toward making this work?
Well, we got to organize groups of mining companies, groups of individuals, groups of leaders, groups of brokerage companies to suggest to the venture exchange that this change is long overdue. And we, together with Terry and others, will form a group to solicit those opinions, take them to the regulators, take them to the politicians, take them to the venture exchange, and see if we can have an easy resolution of the matter, rather than a major fight just a resolution of the matter that they realize it's time for change. And if we get enough voices and appropriate voices, I think that could happen very quickly. And thank God that Terry's taken it upon himself. I mean, look at, I was the easiest convert of all time when I heard that he was doing that, because I know we're ready for it, but I don't want to lead it. But I'm happy, very happy to support it.
Okay, and final question, how would you want our audience to participate? It's many retail investors, also institutional players. What can those people do?
Well, I think if any of them that are interested in supporting us, whether it's just by sheer vote of consciousness, to go to the website and say so. For institutions that want to support it financially, I've supported it financially. That would help too, although I don't think that money's our big problem. I think the problem is getting people to understand the issue. Mm-hmm. So the more people that can bring a voice forward that would support the reinstitution of the Uptick Rule, then it'll give us that much more power with the politicians and the regulators and the exchange.
Okay, great. I think this is a good start to getting the word out then. Thank you so much. Yeah. We'll leave it there.
Thank you for your time, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Okay.
Once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and this is Eric Sprott.